So, first introduce myself a little bit. I'm Vera Bouwmans, as you know by now. I'm a veterinarian by training, and I'm a specialist in laboratory animal science. So my affiliation is with Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and I'm emeritus professor from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. I had the chair in laboratory animal science there. So, and my research field of interest is the impact of the environment on the behavior and the well-being of laboratory animals. So that's my special interest in research. That's also what I have been doing for many years. So, well, what are actually the objectives of this course? Well, the objective is to give you a general background on animal experimentation. So, and to present you with some principles and facts on basic knowledge which is essential for the humane use and care of animals and the quality of research. And you as a scientist, you are responsible, of course, for the design and the performance of animal experiments. But it also means that you are responsible for the well-being of your own animals. And the well-being of the animals, this is inextricably connected with the outcome of your experimental results. So that will be also, well, we really do hope that we can make clear that is really important. So without a good animal, you will never have any good results in science. Okay, so what we also will do is pay attention to your attitude. I mentioned that already this morning, but the attitude that we think about what we are doing. So we should always ask ourselves, is it really necessary to perform this particular experiment? So can we justify what we are doing? And we should also be able to explain that to everyone, even to the garbage man. That we explain what the relevance is of what we are doing. Because of course, well, we are very proud of what we are doing as a scientist, but the public outside the walls of the university or the institute or the company, well, they also would like to know what we are doing. Because sometimes they think that we are doing very cruel things to animals, and I think it will help when we can explain what the relevance is and what it brings to us, what we are doing. So, the red thread in this course will be the 3 R's. The R of replacement, reduction, and refinement, and you will hear about that very many times, I think, in these two weeks. Of course, well, you all have a different background, meaning that for us, for all teachers, it will be difficult to tune in exactly on your own special field. So for some of you, some items in this course might be easy because you know already, for instance, about genetics or statistics or something like that. For others, it might be completely new. So therefore we ask you also to bring in your own special things, your comments or questions. So please ask questions, because for teachers it's always very nice to have an interaction with the participants in the course. So please come forward with questions. We all will like that a lot. Okay, so and also for you, to make you a little bit acquainted with the country we come from, we brought for one of our coffee breaks, we brought a typical Dutch treat. It's called stroopwafels. It's syrup waffles. It's very special. So you can taste that in one of our coffee breaks, maybe this afternoon, or we will bring it and you taste it. So then you know what we like in Holland so much. Okay, so a little bit about the course program. PJ already told you a little bit about it. We will have lectures, demonstrations, practicals, audio-visual materials, and you will do tasks in small groups. Like he said, the preparation and presentation of a scientific protocol, and also the analysis of a scientific paper. But we will explain that at the end of the afternoon. And finally, there will be an examination, and you will be judged individually on the written exam and also as a group for your group work. And that goes together. That gives you at the end a mark, an individual mark at least. Okay, so what is actually laboratory animal science? It's multidisciplinary, meaning, and you have seen it also in the program, meaning that it covers a lot of disciplines. So we have ethics, we have alternatives to animal experimentation, biology of species, housing, anesthesia, pathology, a lot of things. And maybe you might say, yeah, pathology, nice, but when I have a dead animal, I ask the veterinarian or somebody else to look at it, so I don't have anything to do with it. That's not right, because it's you as a scientist who have to judge also the results which comes back from the pathologist, whether it is really something to worry about, or it might harm your experiment or something like that. So all the disciplines, therefore we touch to all those disciplines. It's really important that even when you say, oh, but I'm not using anesthesia, but you never know. So those principles, you should at least learn those things. It's also an auxiliary science, meaning that it is helpful to other sciences, like medicine, pharmacology, veterinary medicine, biology. So that also helps other sciences. And it is contributing to the humane use and care of animals and to the quality of animal experiments. So that is laboratory animal science. So for a moment we go back in history and see how the use of animals developed over time. So of course, well, mankind always used animals. In the beginning for food and for transport. Later also we had animals as a companion, and later on also as experimental animals. And actually Western medicine stems from the ancient Greek philosophers who used animals, but they used it to know how the body was composed and how the organs were in place and that sort of thing. But they did that based on dissection. So Aristotle, one of the Greek philosophers, he started more or less with doing that. He wrote a book about the history of animals and also about parts of animals. And he described already milk and blood and other fluids. And he didn't do that because he was so much interested in animals, actually, more in humans. But in his time, it was not allowed to do postmortems in humans. So as a substitute, he used animals. Another one was Hippocrates. We know him because he is seen as the founder of medicine. We know the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors have to do that when they graduate. And he also wrote a book, the Corpus Hippocraticum, and that is seen as the first medical handbook. And then we find Galen. Galen was the physician of one of the Roman emperors. And he is important because he started to experiment on living and conscious animals. And keep in mind that there was no anesthesia at all in that time. So he used pigs and dogs and monkeys, animals like that. And we see him here doing something with the pig, with his students or colleagues. They look rather old to me, so but maybe students weren't that old in those days. But anyway, he used living and conscious animals. And he discovered a lot. Although it was rather cruel to the animals, that is for sure, what we know now. So, but he discovered already a lot. You see here the scheme of for the distribution of blood and spirits. So we see the brain, and we see the liver, which he called the natural spirit, the heart, he called that the vital spirit, the lungs, and he described the aorta, we call that the venous artery. But what he didn't know was that blood is circulating. He thought blood will start somewhere in the liver, will be distributed to the organs, and then it stops there. So it took until the 17th century, until Harvey, because Harvey discovered that the blood is circulating. So it took a few centuries before that was discovered. But you see, this is already quite a good plan, so to say. And not only in the Western world, people using animals and discovering a lot of things. Also in the eastern part of the world, for instance in Persia, which is now Iran. In Persia we find a famous doctor called Avicenna, and he wrote a canon of medicine. So, and then from Galen until the Renaissance, at least in our Western world, you saw in Persia that was different, but in our Western world there were no empirical studies done. So people had hypotheses, but they were never tested in experiments. So the use of animals stopped, more or less. And then in the Renaissance, we find a revival of experimental medicine and biology. And some of them, starting with that again, is Basel, and he is seen as the founder of anatomy. So he wrote a book about the human body, and that was seen as the first anatomical handbook. And we see him here on the stamp with the human dissected arm. And then we find Descartes, the French philosopher, and he is very important in our way of thinking. He molded more or less the way we still think today about animals. Not exactly, but still, and I will explain how. His view was that you need a mind or a soul in order to be capable of suffering, of feeling pain. And he said animals don't have a mind, they don't have a soul, because he said, he thought that the soul, the location of the soul, was in the pineal gland. And he thought animals don't have a pineal gland, which was not true. But he thought like that. And he said, well, animals don't have a mind, so they are not capable of any suffering. So they are sort of insensate machines. And when someone would say, yeah, but when I throw a cat out of the window and it will land on the ground, it will scream. And then he said, yeah, but when I kick the table, it will also make a noise. So that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that the animal is feeling pain. So it's like an insensate machine. And of course we don't think that way nowadays, but still, I think the majority of us still thinks that we have the right to use animals, that we are more than animals. At least a lot of people think like that, and that still stems from the ideas of Descartes. So for that reason, he was, still is, a very important person in our way of thinking. And of course, well, we came back from that idea partially. So here we see on this picture how they perform experiments in those days without any anesthesia. And we see the dog here tied up on a table and someone explaining, and we see really the dog screaming. So without any anesthesia, and I think the dog moving and trying to get loose again. So in the 18th century, there was an acceptance of experimental medicine because it was contributing to man's welfare. But also, the debate on the justification of animal experiments started. And Jeremy Bentham in the UK in 1789 was one of the first to question the ideas of Descartes, for instance. And he wrote the Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation. And he said, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And he referred also to infants, young infants, babies, and mentally retarded persons, because also they might not be able to talk, they might not be able to reason, but nowadays we know they can suffer, and that was already the question Bentham came forward with. So, in fact, he questioned the ideas, he criticized the ideas of Descartes. So, and then in the end of the 19th century, we see an increase in animal experimentation. Why? Well, one of the things which contributed to that is the development of anesthetics. So ether was discovered and chloroform, for instance. Here we see a human patient being treated under ether anesthesia. And chloroform was also used. For instance, the physician of Queen Victoria used chloroform when she delivered one of her children. So, and of course for the animals that was a good thing as well, because people started to use ether and chloroform for the anesthesia of the experimental animals. But not because they thought they were really in pain, but to immobilize them, because it was much easier. You saw the dog struggling on the table, and of course when you are doing something, well, no, that is not a pleasure. So for that reason, they thought, well, that is very handy to use this type of anesthesia. But for the animals, that was a good thing. Darwin wrote his book here on the origin of species and showed the similarity between man and animals. And that made it possible that we could see an animal as a model for human diseases, for instance, based on this similarity. In France, we find Claude Bernard. He was a very famous physiologist, together with his teacher Majandi. They did a lot of physiological studies on living animals, and he wrote actually the first book on experimental medicine. They did very cruel things from our point of view, very cruel things to animals, like hypothermia, or he used chloroform drugs just for paralyzing, but without eliminating pain, that sort of studies. But he and Majandi, they discovered a lot, and especially in the field of physiology. At the end of the 19th century, we also find Koch with his postulates and that stimulated the field, or created the field of microbiology a lot. So that means that from a diseased person or a diseased animal, when you take material from the diseased animal and you inject it in another animal, that animal might develop the same disease. So these are the postulates of Koch. And also the pharmaceutical industry came up, especially after World War II. There was an increase in the use of animals and the increase in the development of pharmaceuticals. So, when we look at these developments, and I'm really sorry because it doesn't show, so you have to draw it yourself, or at least it will be on the CD or the DVD you will get at the end of the course. There, well, then you'll find the whole figure at least. So we see that the animal use is increasing over time, and it starts here at the end of the 19th century, as we said, with the development of the field of microbiology. And then we see a sharp increase due to pharmacology, as I said, the development of pharmaceuticals just after World War II. And then also the development in toxicology, oncology, immunology, And then we see in the 80s there is decrease. And that is caused by the fact that alternatives are going to be developed. Also, people think more about animal experiments, and the first animal ethics committees judging the experimental protocols are established. So, for that reason, we see a decrease, but due to the development of the field of genetic modification, there is a slight increase again, because we use nowadays we use a lot of transgenic animals. So here, after 2000, we see more or less an increase. And here we see that also that is due mainly to the development of transgenic animals. We see that also increasing over time. And we use those figures from the UK. And why? Because the UK registered already for a long time the number of animals. They were the first country having legislation on the protection of animals, also including experimental animals. And well, that was the only country actually. So therefore we use their data to show an increase or a decrease. So when we look into the use of laboratory animals in some European countries, I must say I don't have figures from India. So we see that the UK and France are heading. Then Holland is somewhere in between. And I must say, well, I don't know how many animals are used in India. But it's only to show you that the UK and France, well, are on top. And what would be the reason? Well, the simple reason is that they have a lot of pharmaceutical industry when you compare to other countries. And that means, well, for the development and the testing of pharmaceuticals, there are a lot of animals used. So when we look at worldwide use of animals in research and testing, then it's well, between the 75 and 100 million vertebrates per year. And I marked vertebrates because, well, that means that only vertebrate animals are counted also, that we register those, and that we can use snails, mollusks, locusts, a lot of animals, fruit flies, without counting them, without knowing whether they are treated well, actually, because we don't have any legislation on those. Do you have any idea why it stopped like that? Why it's only focusing on vertebrates? Why legislation is only focusing on vertebrates? Any idea? What do you think?
Perhaps they're bigger, so we have a sense of saying that okay, these are the big animals with which we are more familiar. Perhaps that could be one way.
Yeah, but when you talk about zebrafish, then I don't know. So because fish are included in our vertebrate animals. Any other thing?
Chicken also included in the vertebrates?
Yeah, chickens also. Yeah, birds are also included. So what could be the reason?
Develop the sense of, develop the nervous system.
Yeah, but you can argue that too, because, well, when you look at octopus, for instance, they have a very high developed neuronal system. So, therefore, that is also questionable. So, it has, yes?
Because we think vertebrates are closely related to us.
Yeah, how near is a fish to us?
As per evolution, we are all came from fish.
Yeah, that could have been a reason, but it's not. It's a simple pragmatic reason. Because, well, when people started to think about legislation, that was the problem. Yeah, but which species are we going to include? Where does it stop? Do we include all mollusks or even bacteria. So where is the end? And then people said, the authorities said, well, let's do something pragmatic. We simply want a clear division. So we take only vertebrate animals. Only when we feel that we should include other animal species, we will do that. And now in our European law, there are also other species included, like for instance octopus, cephalopods, and also some others. My colleague Harry Blom will tell you much more about that when he talks about legislation, which animal species are included. But there are more, at least. No, but still, it's only a few species. So still, the vertebrate animals are the majority in the legislation. And within Europe, well, we use about 10 million per year. So when we look at the animal species which are involved in biomedical research, it's obvious that mouse and rat are the most frequently used species, as we can see. And it might differ from country to country, that's for sure. But it is more or less, the picture is more or less the same. So we see guinea pigs, we see rabbits, birds, mainly chicken, fish, and that's growing, especially with the use of zebrafish. And when you look, for instance, into the figures of Norway, which is a country having a lot of fish and also do a lot of fish research, this part will be bigger in that country. We have other species, and other species will include dogs and cats and primates. Well, those species.
Does the category of other species also include Drosophila melanogaster and C. elegans, which are again animals but not vertebrates?
No, not yet. Harry? C. elegans?
Not the vertebrate.
Sorry?
Not the vertebrate.
No, it's even not included in the added species. No.
Okay.
No.
Professor Vera, when you talk about biomedical research, does it also include cosmetic industry or like that, or just only for health purposes?
That's a good question. Well, in the EU, animal experiments for the cosmetic industry is banned. It's not allowed. In other countries, I don't know. Do you know that?
No.
Yes.
As far as I'm aware, there's only a ban
In the EU countries. Yeah.
And you should be aware that cosmetics is not just lipstick and eye shape, etc.
But also shampoo.
It's also it's soap, shampoo,
yeah.
sun tan, etc. All these kind of things. So the regular body care products, so to say.
Yeah. And
In
sun
India,
and
it's
sun
recently
cream.
banned.
Sorry.
It's recently banned in India.
It is recently
Yeah,
banned
that's
in India.
recently the drug controller.
That's very good to know. How nice. Yeah. Okay. So in many countries it is banned by now. So when we look into the fields where animals are used, we see that the majority of the animals are used in the development and testing of vaccines and biologicals, also drug research, heart research, cardiac research, cancer research, of course, toxicity tests, a little bit in education, in courses like this, for instance, and also other research. Other research meaning fundamental research, which might not be directly related to human diseases, but look at the fundamentals of a certain disease. Like cancer research might have a direct connection with the human disease, but fundamental research might not. But in the end, of course, it's aiming at might aim into diseases of humans. So when we look at the degree of discomfort we inflict to animals, in some countries, in in Europe, we have to grade, to estimate the degree of discomfort and tell the authorities what we think the animals, how much the animals are suffering. So that's the case in some countries, and for that reason we have those figures. So we see that there is more than minor discomfort, but this might also include killing of animals without prior actions, so to say, in order to get organs, to harvest organs. So killing, and that might be surprising, is not seen as discomfort. So discomfort is about the suffering prior to the killing. That is, and for that reason, this is a very big part. So we can also find moderate discomfort and severe in about 18, maybe 18-20% of the cases. So, but what is it? What is moderate and what is minor, actually? So there are a few categories. Also, the European Union had made a small list. It's not really conclusive, but it's more to help you as a researcher to find, where is my experiment fitting in. Does it resemble this experiment or that? Then it might be moderate or severe or mild. So first, this is when you perform an experiment under anesthesia and the animal will not recover, but will be killed at the end, then it is seen as no discomfort at all. Well, of course you can question that, because putting the animal under anesthesia might be seen, well, to me it might be even mild discomfort, but it's seen as no discomfort at all. And then we have minor of mild or mild. That might be a single blood sampling or a single injection or non-invasive imaging like MRI. But then we have to keep in mind that always goes together with anesthesia. So when you perform a study in the MRI and you do that every day, you have to put the animal under anesthesia every day. And when you do that many times, it might not be mild anymore, but then you might call it moderate because it counts then. So, and also short-term deprivation of social partners, because the majority of most of our laboratory animals are social living animals. That means when you deprive them from social partners, when you house them individually, that might stress them. So for that reason, it's at least some discomfort, and maybe even more than only mild. Moderate might be a repeated blood sampling or repeated injections, surgery which are carried out under general anesthesia, metabolic caging, up to 5 days, meaning that you put your animal in a metabolic cage with a wire mesh floor so that you can collect 24-hour urine and feces. But then the animal is housed individually and on wire mesh, while it probably comes from a cage which has bedding in it. So that together gave it already a moderate discomfort, I hear. And severe, that could be acute toxicity tests or vaccine potency test, meaning that when you are testing the potency of a vaccine, you will certainly have a control group which has not the umbrella of the vaccine. So this group will get a full-blown disease after the infection. That means that that group, at least, will suffer a lot in most cases. So that might be severe. Also the induction of tumors, which are causing long-lasting pain or ulceration, might occur in those tumors. That would be very painful. So that is also seen as severe discomfort or an inescapable electric shock. So, well, this is obviously a very sick animal, a very sick mouse. We will tomorrow we will talk a little bit more about the signs of pain and the signs of sickness. So but you can see this is really a sick mouse. So that means severe discomfort. Where do we find severe discomfort? In which fields? Well, that will be in the development and the testing of sera vaccines and biologicals, also in drug research, in cardiac research, cancer research, of course toxicology, diagnostics, and other research, again fundamental research. And that is, as I said, it's about 80 or 20%. That also will differ between countries. So, doing our experiments, there will also be a public, as I said before, outside the walls of the universities or institutions. And meaning that they also get aware what is done to animals. And already years ago, there were those kind of advertisements from animal welfare organizations. So people started to think. And of course, already in the 18th century or the 19th century, the first anti-vivisection movements started already in France and in the UK. So for centuries already, people are protesting against the use of animals. And they said not really stop, but they said, well, we only can do that maybe when we make conditions, when we make legislation in order to control what we are doing, and not that we think, okay, well, we can use animals just like that. So, and for instance, a very famous writer, Coetzee, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2003. He's from South Africa, and he wrote a book about the lives of animals. And one of his quotes are, anyone who says that life matters less to animals than it does to us has not held in his hand an animal fighting for its life. So people thinking about that, well, they formed also the basis for legislation. So people ask for rules and regulations on animal experimentation. And why? Because which problems do people have with animal experimentation? When you talk to people who are not in this field, then yeah, they might say to you, I don't understand why you can do things to animals like that. Well, one of the problems people have is that we say, well, we have the right to use animals. So we are not equal. We are just above the animals, so we have the right to rule over the animals, because we feel we are equal. So these people will also not eat meat, and probably will also not use medicine, because otherwise, yeah, that is hard to sell, so to speak. So these are the real ethical problems. Other problems, though, can be technical. So you can argue whether animal experiments are reliable. Can we really extrapolate our findings to humans, for instance? No, we cannot. We all know that it is impossible to trust 100% the findings we find in our animals. And history has also proven that. And it is, for us, it's good that Alexander Fleming, who invented the penicillin, which cured a lot of people, he invented that on a plate. And we were very lucky, actually, that he didn't test it in guinea pigs, because in his time, guinea pigs were used as experimental animals. And I don't know whether you know that, but guinea pigs are extremely sensitive to penicillin. They get into an anaphylactic shock immediately. So when you inject them with penicillin, every veterinarian will know that, they will drop dead from your needle. So I don't think that he would be very happy when he had seen that happening. But he didn't do that. He tested it only on the plate, so therefore we have penicillin. So that means it doesn't say that what is good for us is good for the animals and vice versa. And I don't know how it is here in India, but in our countries we see on a regular basis, we see in our newspapers, we can read in our newspaper that drugs are taken off the market after some years they have been used and they have been developed. It takes about 10 years, 8-10 years before you get a drug on the market. And that includes, of course, well, cell work, it includes also animal testing, but still they withdraw it from the market because of serious side effects. So why is that? That's crazy, because, well, they did a lot of testing, so why is it not safe? Well, that can have a lot of reasons. For instance, those side effects could not be seen in animals, because your rat will not tell you that it has a headache, or that it is hearing voices, or that it becomes psychotic. That is what they simply don't tell you. So we cannot find all the side effects in our rats or in our other animals. And another reason might be that the incidence is low, because after the whole process of animal testing and in vitro testing, finally there will be a clinical trial in humans. But the trial will maybe involve 1,000 persons, maybe 2,000 persons. When the incidence is lower, you will never find it. You only find it after a few years later. So that makes it more or less unreliable. We have to admit that, simply as that. So when people tell you that, you can only say, yeah, well, in a sense, that's right. Yeah, but on the other hand, we have a lot of findings which are very useful to humans. So it's a sort of balance. And for some people, some experiments might not be seen as necessary. Some people feel we should not use animals for educational purposes, for instance. Other people feel we should not use animals for military defense. Because also a lot of animals are used in there for finding new ways to make war, and that sort of biological weapons, for instance, or shooting wounds, how to treat them, that sort of thing. And for some people, that is simply completely unnecessary. And of course, well, I don't know how that is here in India, but in Europe, a lot of people were fighting against the LD50. That's a toxicity test where you estimate the dose when 50% of the animals is dying. And that is a very cruel test, because the only measure that you have is the death of the animal. So you have to wait until the animal is dead. So you don't have the opportunity to kill the animal when it's ill. So you have to wait until it's really dead. And that is, yeah, because that's your only measuring point. And nowadays we have other tests with lower doses, where when the animal gets ill, it might be the end of the test. So that is a much more animal-friendly test. So the LD50 is banned by Brussels, in the European Union, although some companies ask for a special permit to do that, because they might export their products to a country as the US or Japan, and some countries still asking for an LD50. So when you want to do that, you ask for a special permit. Okay, so this is about what kind of problems do people have. So, when talking about legislation, that was funny that the same quote was also used for the syllabus. So Gandhi, very famous here, of course, and also in our world, very, very well respected. He said already, the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. So, the aim of international legislation is, besides of the enhancement of animal welfare, also the enhancement of standardization and harmonization, and to enhance the quality of research. That is connected, as I said in the beginning already. So the development of legislation, I will not pay so much attention to that because Harry Blom will do that in his lecture. But I said already that one of the first legislation was the Cruelty to Animals Act in the UK, and we also find in the US an Animal Welfare Act, but this surprisingly excludes rats, mice and birds. To me that's always a little bit strange because that's the majority of the animals used. But Harry will probably say something about that too, huh? Yeah. Okay, and then in Europe we have two major legislation. That is the European Convention, the ETS 123, and the Council Directive, which has been recently revised in 2010. So these are those two, but as I said, Harry will elaborate on that. Well, the basis of our legislation was laid by Russell and Birch from the UK in 1959. They wrote their book, The Principles of Humane Experimental Technique. So the small one is Bill Russell, and the taller one is Birch, is Rex Birch. So they were scientists, and they thought about the use of animals. They wrote a book, and they launched the 3 R's principle. And that is the basis of laboratory animal science and also the basis of that legislation. So the R's stands for replacement, reduction, and refinement. And well, also you can see that back in the European directive, just briefly, because here it said that you cannot carry out a procedure when you can also use another method which is not something using animals. So that is alternatives. Also, it says something about reduction because you also should choose the minimum number of animals. And it also says something about refinement, because you should involve animals with the lowest capacity to experience discomfort, you should cause the least discomfort, and also that as an endpoint shall be avoided as far as possible. And you should use humane endpoints. I will come to that later. So, what is replacement?